Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, colleagues from wherever you are, or good night from if you're down under. I want to welcome you again to the virtual workshop series. We have come to the end of the workshop series. It's a bit of a bittersweet experience, as I was discussing with one of the colleagues. We put in so much work, and it will not be seeing each other for a while, but it's also good that we have actually come to the end of a very, very exciting session. I hope you are all keeping well wherever you are. My name is Edwin Abuya, and I am based at the University of Nairobi. Now, there are a couple of, some of us have been here with us for the last couple of weeks as we went through the workshop series. And just a couple of housekeeping rules that we have. We had them in the first session, but it's just good to repeat them. The first is that the session is being recorded. And I think you've seen something popping up and telling you that the session is being recorded, and the video will be shared with the wider audience. I think you have an option either to check yes or no. Again, in terms of name, if you can just rename how you appear on this call. Start with your name, with the name of your organization, and then you can come then to who you are, so that at least we can know which organization you're representing or you're reporting from. So, for example, you'd see on your screen IOM, we have Alice. From PDD, we have Sarah, and from the Kaldor Centre, we have Tamara. Cynthiana's is a bit on done the other way around, but it's all right. It's all right. We can work with that, Cynthiana. Don't worry. Just a point of instruction number 3, if you can, please, you can switch off your video and it's okay. But more important, please mute so that we don't have the cross conversation for many people in terms of the conversations. Number 4, if you can, again, just use the chat box to introduce yourself. You can tell us good morning. And there'll be an opportunity later on if you want to ask any questions that you have. So the housekeeping rules are on the right of your screen, on the left of your screen rather. You can, they're pretty straightforward. Now we have a full-on agenda for the next 2 hours, and part of my task is to make sure that within 2 hours we are in and out of this session. The first, we have 2 keynote speakers, Cecile and Chaloka. They are Cecile, I will give you a brief on their bios a bit later, and that we'll have some keynote presentation from the 2. And then for those who have been with us all through, you know that we had 4 thematic working groups. So we're going to give a chance to 1 member of each thematic group just to come and give us highlights on what the thematic group covered, as a way of actually bridging the gap that some of us may not have attended all the sessions. And then we will have a presentation on the outcomes and recommendations of the workshop series. We've had a lot to cover in the last couple of weeks, so there'll be an overview of what is it that were the outcomes and what recommendations do we have. And then at the last point, we will have a closing remark from the organizing partners. If you recall, during our opening session, we had about 4 or 5 of our partners also giving a brief on what they expect the workshop series to deliver, and how also in terms of where they fit in the general scheme of things, both as an institution and also the personnel that they lent us. And so after that, then we will close and we will say goodbye to each one. Now we have interpretation services, and if you go to the bottom of your screen, there's a little guide there entitled EN if you're using the English mode. And if you click on that little guide, it will ask you the 2 channels, either in English or in French. So feel free to tap into each interpretation method, whichever language you're most comfortable with. In terms of talking, if you'll be asking a question, or you'll be presenting, or you'll be talking at any stage, I request that you talk a bit slowly, so that the interpreters can actually catch you, whatever you're saying. We don't miss out on anything that you will have said. Now, where have we been since the plenary session that we started off in April? We have had, Eric, if you can move to the next slide. We have had just over 250 people who were registered, and you'll be able to see that we had researchers, we had policy experts, government reps, judges. I've just seen Judge Mativo from Kenya who came for the opening session. He's just joined in. We have legal practitioners, civil societies. We had students, and it came a bit to a surprise. We even had 2 journalists on board. So we had a cross-section of everybody who you can imagine in the room. Again, we had about 40 experts who came from the fields that I've mentioned, the areas. The fields were law, policy. I think there was also, I noticed also there were some students who came on board. And in total time, we had 22 hours of discussion. 20 poll questions were put out, and we had just under 2,000 comments that came, but it was a lot of commentary that came through. So in other words, we had a very, very rich session with lots of contribution, active participation, and debates that went on and on until at a certain point you had to say, now stop. We had to close the sessions. And in total, we generated 20 recommendations for future research. We will share this with you later on. They all draw from the issues that we raised on climate change, migration, and displacement. Yeah. And so the point here is we had so much information to disseminate. So we also asked you, you remember initially we asked, why would you like to be part of this virtual workshop series? And these are some of the comments that came on board. Some people wanted to know the experts. Who is it? Who is an expert in that area? Others said that this actually fits within the work that I am doing. Others talked about the impact. They wanted to know more about the challenges, and we'll also discuss today what are some of the ways that we can go about enhancing this discussion. There are also other people who just say, no, I just want to know who is who in the room. I'm writing my PhD in this area, and I need to know who is writing on it so that I can at least have a view on my potential examiners or what else I need to read. So the reasons were varied, and it was just exciting to know. And also you can also see that from the list of participants, we had a wide range of participants, which perhaps in a normal situation, it would have been a bit of a challenge to get everybody out in the room. I would like now to go to the next section, which Eric, you can now turn off the slides. Thank you.
I'm really sorry to interrupt, Edwin, but we're having a problem that we don't have French interpretation at the moment. So could I suggest perhaps we might just pause for 1 minute and see if we can resolve that before we begin the keynote presentation. Okay. Thanks so much, everyone, for your patience. So I think I've just received a message saying it's fixed, so let's just do a short test. Could someone confirm that they're receiving the French interpretation now? Okay, I've got a
On vous entend très bien maintenant.
Fantastic.
Okay, good. So
thanks, everyone.
So we can go on, yeah? Okay, so I would like now to move ahead to introduce the 2 speakers. And the 2 speakers, just before I bring them on board, we have Cecilia, who is the UN special. Okay, Cecilia, who is the UN Special Rapporteur on the human rights of IDPs. And we also have Professor Chaloka Beyani, who was the previous, one-time UN Rapporteur also for IDP. Chaloka has worked a lot in the area of human rights, and he's done work in Kenya, and that's how I come to know Chaloka. And when Chaloka comes on the screen, you will see that he has got a virtual beach. So I guess that gives us all inspiration in terms of, yeah, there you go. You can see the virtual beach, and he's dressed up for the beach actually, yeah. And then we have Cecilia, who is originally from Filipino and studied in Philippines, and then went over to the UK to do a master's, and also in Geneva. And she's now sitting where Professor Chaloka used to sit before. So these are prominent speakers. They are very vast, well versed on the issues of disasters, climate change, human mobility, displacement. And we believe that their perspectives and objectives will really, really help us in terms of where we are to move forward. We have already discussed a lot to do with the problems and the challenges, and we now need to move one step forward in terms of then how can we pull together the research so that it comes to the level where we're making a bit of substantive plans and ideas on moving the way forward. So I will give you, Cecilia and Chaloka, we have 10 minutes each to pitch and make our pitch on, give our keynote speeches for this time. So Cecilia, can I ask you to go first, and then Chaloka, you can go next. Is that okay? Okay, Cecilia.
That's fine. Thank you. Thank you very much, Edwin, for the very kind introduction. And I would like to thank all the organizers for the invitation for me to give a keynote speech. I am equally thrilled to have Professor Chaloka Biani, my esteemed predecessor in this position, also on the same panel. And it's always just a pleasure to be with him and discuss ideas and ways forward. So Chairperson, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor for me to address you in my capacity as the Special Rapporteur of the United Nations on the human rights of internally displaced persons to co-close this workshop series, which I believe has ably achieved its objectives to identify knowledge gaps, which to match them with research proposals. And such proposals aim to improve the future law and policy development and implementation in the context of disasters and climate change in Africa. As you may already know, I presented my thematic report to the United Nations General Assembly last autumn, focused on the topic of internal displacement in the context of slow onset adverse effects of climate change. And there I really made this very important message that I know that you are one with me on this, that climate action cannot wait. And states must take action to protect people from direct threats to life and other human rights impacts of foreseeable natural hazards and related displacement. This is why research, any research, should not merely be long-term in terms of getting evidence, but should also contribute to such action, climate change action, to protect human rights impacts. With human mobility linked to the adverse effects of climate change, including displacement, that is expected to increase significantly over the coming years and decades, there are indications that the expected scale of movement in Africa and other regions of the world as well will be quite high, with most population movements relating actually to slow onset adverse effects of climate change expected to remain within national borders. So a central recommendation of my report is really focused on states that have the primary responsibility under international law to protect internally displaced persons. And this main recommendation is to integrate climate change related displacement into laws, policies, and programs on human mobility, and to integrate human mobility, including disaster displacement, into laws, policies, and programs on disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation. I also explicitly recommended as a way forward the conduct of interdisciplinary research on the phenomenon of displacement in the context of slow onset adverse effects of climate change, the legal and policy responses at the national and subnational levels and how these are implemented. And in fact, my report also reflects that we must include human rights actors on the ground, and particularly national human rights institutions, which are often critical stakeholders with independent mandates that serve as a basis for human rights monitoring, data collection, early warning systems, complaint handling, and in that so also produce their own data that would be a rich source for the research so that we can move forward on this very important topic. Underlining all of these recommendations is, of course, the implementation of the human rights obligations of states in relation to climate change and associated internal displacement. I'm therefore very heartened to see how fruitful the workshop series has been and the numerous proposals that have resulted across the 4 themes. There is extensive evidence, as we all know, of the widespread impacts of climate change on the enjoyment of human rights, such as the rights to life, health, housing, food, water, education, cultural rights, collective rights. Real human rights issues that are experienced or violated every day of internally displaced persons. And I would like to also give particular impact to the rights of indigenous peoples, to the right to self-determination, and also other internally displaced persons that are affected because they are actually are associated with protection of their land, including, for example, pastoralists, which we have as well in Africa. And these impacts contribute to displacement. Displacement further impacts the enjoyment of human rights. Of course, I would like to underline that in all of these discussions, the guiding principles on internal displacement clearly stipulate that disasters may be a cause of displacement. And we also have the IASC operational guidelines on protection of persons in disasters, which provides a very clear frame for a rights-based approach to disaster response. The virtual workshop themes and discussions have captured the fact that human mobility in the context of slow onset processes can take many, many forms. And the adverse effects of climate change can involve, in fact, slow onset events such as sea level rise, desertification, glacial retreat, and sudden onset events such as floods and storms. In this way, we can also see that research has to look at the sudden and onset events being intertwined with each other. Slow onset processes can also compound other displacement drivers, such as intercommunal tensions, violence, and armed conflict. So the intersecting risks of climate change and armed conflict heighten the vulnerability of people and communities and undermine their adaptive capacity, increasing their risk of displacement. What is also very important is that in most cases, movement is not entirely voluntary or forced, as we see it in other classical situations of internal displacement. And in fact, movement in climate change adaptation or response by people in terms of human mobility may fall somewhere on a continuum between the two, with different degrees of voluntariness and constraint. In many cases, movement can be an effective adaptation strategy and prevent arbitrary displacement. But people, I would like to insist, people are forcibly displaced when they are obliged to leave because they can no longer adapt to the changing climate. In fact, they have no other option other than to leave. For example, when an area has become uninhabitable or too dangerous for the human habitation. I look forward to seeing how the research actually helps further our understanding about these particular challenges that arise, but also more important, how it can actually contribute not only to law and policy, but to the implementation of the human rights for internally displaced persons. Particularly achieving durable solutions, especially that we have also protracted displacement, can be very challenging in this context, as slow onset processes tend to be long-term, sometimes invisible even, and in some cases, irreversible, resulting in a higher risk of protracted displacement. And while climate change is global, its adverse effects and related mobility affect people differently. Therefore, communities living in certain areas, such as low-lying coastal areas in the deserts, for example, are more exposed to slow onset events and at a higher risk of disaster displacement. People, and I've come across them, people whose livelihoods depend heavily on ecosystems, such as indigenous peoples, farmers, herders, pastoralists, and fisherfolk are affected more directly and at higher risk of displacement. These processes and related displacement likewise intersect with gender, age, ethnicity, socioeconomic status and cultural backgrounds, and disability. And therefore, these are not monolithic groups, because they result in differentiated impacts on the different groups and, unfortunately, further exacerbate pre-existing inequalities and vulnerabilities. Children and young persons suffer the most severe impacts of climate change, resulting from the historic greenhouse gas emissions or previous generations, while they are also particularly vulnerable to the adverse effects of climate change and at higher risk of violence. At this point in time, and before I conclude in the next 3 minutes, I likewise would like to add that the issue of loss and damages brought about by climate change on specific groups within the context of internal displacement is an issue that needs further discussion and accompanying research. Not much discussed about or talked about in the Warsaw International Mechanism for Loss and Damages associated with climate change impacts. Loss and damage is an underlying theme for persons internally displaced, precisely because they are displaced. We need to change this narrative of neglect or marginalization of internally displaced persons from the policy discussions at this level. And evidence-based research can contribute significantly to raise not merely the level of understanding and acknowledgement of the problems, but really to contribute to the policy decisions for impact. Of course, we need to take into consideration also the COVID-19 pandemic, which have hit the most vulnerable people the hardest and have exacerbated existing inequalities and vulnerabilities. Finally, I would like to add, by acknowledging how important and essential it is to recognize and support the great agencies of the people who are affected by climate change, and of course, internally displaced persons themselves. In many contexts, they actually display remarkable strength, resourcefulness, and resilience in the face of disasters and displacement. In fact, despite the challenges, barriers, and discrimination that they face, they not only go on to live and survive, but also make the best of their abilities to go forward to get out of their situation. These people have traditional knowledge and valuable perspectives that can actually contribute to the design of programmatic responses, disaster risk reduction strategies, and their durable solutions. Affected communities in all their diversity must be an integral part of the response and solutions of internal displacement. Thank you very much for this opportunity, and I wish the other speakers well, and looking forward, of course, to hearing my predecessor, Professor Bayani, but also to hearing the results in the ensuing panels that will follow us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cecilia, for that very, very powerful statement, and for giving us a bit of where we come from and challenging us on the way forward. Okay, Prof, perhaps you can pick it up from there.
Well, thank you very much, Edwin. Thank you very much, Cecilia. It's always a pleasure to listen to you. I attended the side event, I think, that you had this week, and only had time to listen to your statement on housing, property rights, and the like. Let me start by thanking the organizers of the workshop. I think this is a very important topic to have drawn on, and I was at least fortunate to attend two of the workshops and to listen to both the deliberations and the outcomes. We'll concentrate much more in my address on the issue of law and policy, the international frameworks, and the importance of formulating law and policy in the area of disasters, climate change, and displacement at national level, as well as research themes and the importance of research in this particular area. But lest we forget, as an academic, I can't avoid following the story. And the story begins in 1898, when a renowned Swedish scientist, Svante Arrhenius, warned that carbon dioxide emissions could lead to global warming. At that time, his warning was like science fiction, and no one actually took it seriously until 1985, when the discovery was made of the ozone hole in the Antarctic, and the issue of greenhouse gases and global warming was then taken seriously. 3 years later, in 1988, the United Nations Environment Programme and the World Meteorological Organization established the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And it was the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change that made the clarion call and observed in its early report that the greatest single impact of climate change would be on human mobility, and that 150 million people would be on the move by 2050 due to the effects of climate change, and that human society will face new risks and pressures, threats to global food security, and that people and ecosystems will need to adapt to the future climate regime, and hence the theme of adaptation. So we see currently that disasters and the adverse impacts of climate change are already one of the leading drivers of human mobility, which was foreseen by the intergovernmental change, and that this is likely to increase in the future. So drawing on international frameworks that inform policy and law on the issue of disasters and climate change, I think first of all, the Hyogo Framework for Action 2005 to 2015, building the resilience of nations and communities to disasters, laid the ground. And as Cecilia did say, the IASC operational guidelines on the protection of persons in situations of natural disasters followed in 2011. The Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction 2015 to 2030 succeeded the Hyogo Framework as the first major agreement of the post-2015 development agenda, and provides concrete actions to protect development gains from the risk of disasters. I think it's important to note that the Sendai Framework works hand in hand with the 2030 agenda agreements, the Paris Agreement on Climate Change, the Addis Ababa Action Agenda on Financing for Development, the New Urban Agenda, and ultimately, of course, the Sustainable Development Goals. As in the case of the primary responsibility of the state to protect IDPs that Cecilia spoke about, the Sendai Framework also recognizes that the state has the primary role to reduce disaster risk, but that responsibility should be shared with other stakeholders, including local government, the private sector, and other stakeholders too. After these frameworks, in 2009, the African Union adopted the Kampala Convention, which marked a further development, especially in the context of disasters and disaster preparedness, addressing in Article 4.2 the importance of devising early warning systems in the context of continental early warning in areas of potential displacement, to establish as well as implement disaster risk reduction strategies, disaster preparedness and management, and where necessary, provide immediate protection and assistance to IDPs. It went on then for the first time in a normative framework to link disasters and climate change in Article 5.4, that states parties shall take measures to protect and assist persons who have been internally displaced due to natural or human-made disasters, including climate change. And as we fully know, the Kampala Convention, of course, has obligations for the states parties to domesticate its provisions into national law. And therefore, from the point of view of the African Union and the African continent, that framework is an important one in terms of formulating law and policy on these issues. From the Kampala Convention, 2010, a year later, a further significant normative development took place with the adoption of the Cancun agreements, especially paragraph 14F, which recognized, again for the first time, the category of climate change-induced displacement and the importance of measures of adaptation at national, regional, and international levels. So from the perspective of these frameworks on law and policy, what do we need to do in order to move forward? I suggest that first there should be a synthesis of the EASC operational guidelines on the protection of persons in situations of disasters, and a shift from natural disasters specifically to disasters inclusively, with a Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction. SDGs were relevant, and of course, climate change-induced displacement and adaptation to the effects of climate change, including slow onset disasters and planned relocation. What tools do we need in order to try and achieve this? First, formulate and implement appropriate laws and policies now, which could help to limit the number of people forced to move and could ensure that those who do move can do so safely with dignity. In the context of Africa, at least the forefront developments here include the 1969 OAU Refugee Convention, expanded refugee definition, that is persons who are forced to move from their homes or places of residence because of external aggression, occupation, aggression, or events seriously disturbing public order. And it is this latter aspect of that definition that was taken up by African states as the basis for including at least climate change disaster-related displacement. The Kampala Convention, as already mentioned, a normative framework that needs to be incorporated and domesticated in international law, with the specific obligations I have referred to, but also in a holistic way that provides the basis for a cohesive normative implementation in relation to internally displaced persons, disasters, as well as climate change. The recently adopted IGAD Free Movement Protocol is also an important one. The world's first specific provisions for ensuring the disaster and climate change affected communities can utilize free movement arrangements to avoid or escape from these impacts. I think we should also take into account the relevant provisions of the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly, and Regular Migration 2018, in particular paragraph 18, which addresses natural disasters, the adverse effects of climate change, and environmental degradation. And there are two paragraphs that would inform law and policy in the context of displacement specifically here. In terms of 18I, develop adaptation and resilience strategies to sudden onset and slow onset natural disasters, the adverse effects of climate change and environmental degradation, such as desertification, land degradation, drought and sea level rise, taking into account the potential implications for migration. And then displacement is specifically mentioned in J, integrate displacement considerations in disaster preparedness strategies and promote cooperation with neighboring and other relevant countries to prepare for early warning, contingent planning, stockpiling, coordination mechanisms, evacuation planning, reception and assistance arrangements, as well as public information. In terms of implementation of the relevant laws and policies, first, of course, formulation in such a way as to bring about horizontal and vertical normative coherence across all sectors and levels of government. Implementation of the laws at the national and local levels to actually meet the needs of affected populations, which may differ depending on exactly where, how, and why they move. Of research and its importance in this regard, there's a critical role here to be acknowledged, that researchers provide evidence to policymakers regarding the impacts of disasters and climate change on human mobility and the needs of affected populations, guide governments and actors in the full implementation of existing law and policy frameworks, providing legal guidance, making recommendations, reinstitutional arrangements, and to identify examples that are effective in practice, and to support the development of new laws and policies where needed, identify gaps and make recommendations. And I think in the workshop that I attended, we saw the duality of disaster laws on the one hand and laws related to displacement on the other, and made a call for the integration of these. Recommendations for future research could be made in the following ways. Research into institutional arrangements adopted by African governments to manage disaster and climate change related displacement could help identify examples of effective practice and lessons for governments in how best to coordinate action across ministries, that is migration, disaster, environment, and security. These would include research into a whole of government approach as a multidimensional coordination governance system that cannot be addressed by one government sector alone and is needed to ensure horizontal and vertical legal and policy coherence across all sectors and levels of government. What we tend to see is a one-line ministry coordination system, which is ineffective. Research into whole of society approach, that is a broad multi-stakeholder partnership to address internal displacement in all its dimensions by including internally displaced persons, displacement affected communities, civil society, academia, the private sector, parliamentarians, trade unions, national human rights institutions, the media, and other relevant stakeholders in the governance of internal displacement. In Kenya, for example, the parliamentarians were quite active in bringing about Kenya's law on internally displaced persons. Research in how African governments undertake the planned relocation of communities at risk of future climate change impacts could identify gaps in existing regulatory mechanisms and generate recommendations for how this should be filled. And in the workshop, I think we had specific examples. Most of all, I remember the example given from Senegal of planned relocation due to rising sea levels. Research in the predicament of those who do not move, despite disasters and climate impacting their lives, may shed light on the specific needs and most critical rights of such populations. Experience gained from my time when I was special rapporteur showed that it was the most vulnerable and poverty-stricken that actually didn't want to move. I remember meeting communities in the Maldives who said, we think that land reclamation is actually the way forward. If we move from here, we'll spend all our lives building our houses. And if we move, we'll have no houses, we'll have no livelihoods. whereas the REACH, of course, tends to engage in individual adaptation measures and move accordingly. So finally, we hope that the research agenda and new research network that will follow the workshop series will be taken up by academic and policy researchers, governments, policy organizations, donors to take forward the important recommendations and opportunities that they present. I thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof, for that elaborate exposition. And I forgot to mention that Prof also has extensive experience working in Africa for the AU and also consulting in many other areas. Now, I would like us to move now after those two keynote presentations to remember we had 4 working groups. So I'm going to give a chance to each member of the individual working groups just to give us a snapshot on what the working groups discussed and what is the way forward on this critical issue that Prof has and also Cecilia mentioned about future research and where we should go in terms of moving forward. I'm not going to introduce the members; they are there on the schedule. So for working group 1, Sarah, are you set for working group 1?
Yes, thank you so much, Edwin. My name is Sarah. I work as policy officer for PDD, and I had the pleasure and honor to co-lead this working group together with Edwin. So Professor Edwin, it would have been much appropriate that you present the results of the working group in this august panel, but I'll step in since you have other responsibilities today. So our thematic working group 1 focused on the law and policy areas of climate change and disaster risk reduction. In our first session, we had 7 expert commentators from both of these fields, from the 3 different subregions in Africa, East, West, and the South, who participated to the series. And after many hours of discussion, the group landed finally on 5 research proposals addressing some of the key knowledge gaps, and I'm glad to have heard some of them identified by our keynote speakers as well, so we're not too far off track, and existing opportunities that the experts identified and the workshop participants over the course of the sessions. So we're putting forward 5 research proposals to the research agenda. The first one is on climate change, law, and policy. Compared to the situation a few years back, global and regional policy tools and processes have meanwhile put human mobility in the context of disasters and climate change on their agenda. Displacement, as we heard, is included in the Sendai framework. It's recognized in the Paris Agreement. And governments have been sensitized through processes such as the Nansen Initiative, many of them endorsing the protection agenda. In the realm of climate change and climate change policy, displacement has, in these past years, been traditionally discussed under adaptation. Some national adaptation plans in the regions also include references to displacement and/or migration. The research proposal that comes out of our thematic working group 1 is to conceptualize disaster displacement as loss and damage. And this seeks to take discussions beyond adaptation and operationalize what's coming out of the UNFCCC mechanisms, for example, the Warsaw International Mechanism, the Task Force on Displacement, and the Santiago Network. The second research proposal is on disaster risk reduction law and policy. And here also we have the good news that at the national and regional level, there's a good number of disaster risk reduction and, as I said, climate change policies and frameworks that we can build on. To date, many of those don't specifically include migration and displacement considerations yet, but as states are seeking to comply with the Sendai framework and seek to comply with Target E to formulate or update their DRR strategies, there is an opportunity to change that. There are now tools out there, such as the Words into Action guidelines on disaster displacement, where I hope we can have the link in the chat for those who don't know this guidance, to help governments and stakeholders address displacement in disaster risk reduction. The bad news is, or the research gap, that national statistics offices do not yet sufficiently gather necessary data on displacement. So there isn't a sound basis for policy development. And indicators are missing to quantify disaster displacement. So the research proposal from this group is to develop disaster displacement metrics that countries can use on a voluntary basis to report to the Sendai framework, and also the overarching Sustainable Development Goals umbrella. We believe that both of these proposals are cutting edge, that they haven't been undertaken before. So please let us know if you're working on them. And we also believe that they have relevance outside of Africa. The third proposal is a big discussion that we had in the workshop series was on the need for data and evidence to inform policy. And also the question how to disseminate available research and make it visible and take it back to governments for that policy development. So our third research proposal is based on a very effective practice we found from the IGAD region, which conducted a mapping in all the countries of the IGAD region and at the regional level, looking at the extent to which disaster risk reduction, climate change, and development policies consider human mobility in the context of disasters and climate change. So we propose for this mapping to be extended to the other African subregions and then taken back to the governments to discuss for policy development. The next information we heard from our experts was that there's encouraging practices already out there at the national level of institutional setups, how governments deal with this issue. For example, through interministerial working groups or sub-commissions on mobility and climate change. We heard examples from Senegal, from Benin, and other countries. So regarding the different ways how governments deal with these issues, this research proposal proposes to investigate different institutional setups to address disaster displacement through case studies, looking at what are effective coordination mechanisms, which level of government should address this, which setups work well. The last proposal, number 5, is on data and evidence. We discussed there's so many data and evidence gaps on vulnerability, on exposure, the coping capacity of affected populations, in particular though, at the local level and for urban settings, almost a blind spot in the studies. So the last proposal is tailored to urban settings, studying urban vulnerability and resilience to displacement, also through case studies. And we are very well aware that this does not cover all the research and knowledge gaps on the African continent on climate change and disaster risk reduction law and policy, but we believe those are important next steps to take, and we will look forward to taking them together. Over to you, Edwin.
Okay, thank you so much, Sarah. Those were very short 5 minutes. I'll now call on the second working group, Dr. Ward, for another 5 minutes just to summarize. And if Sarah had said something that the working group also worked on, you can just highlight it.
Bonjour.
So, Dr. Ward, bonjour.
Est-ce que vous m'entendez? Bonjour, est-ce que vous m'entendez?
Oui.
Ok, donc je m'appelle Cheikh Tidiane Wade, je suis enseignant-chercheur à l'université Hassan Seck de Ziguinchor et j'ai travaillé avec les collègues du groupe 2 sur la migration et la libre circulation. Alors, nous avons d'abord travaillé sur 6 proposals que je vais lister à la fin de ma présentation très rapidement. Et nous avons essayé de faire une synthèse basée un peu sur ces 6 proposals et sur aussi les recommandations des experts. Alors, le premier point qui nous semble assez problématique, où on doit faire vraiment des recherches, c'est le rôle des accords bilatéraux entre les États dans la lutte contre les déplacements et les migrations dans le contexte des catastrophes et du changement climatique en Afrique en général. Alors, la libre circulation des personnes à l'intérieur des grands ensembles géographiques régionaux, comme la CEDEAO par exemple, est l'une des priorités fondamentales dans les politiques d'intégration pour une meilleure transformation structurelle des territoires. Alors, les nombreuses politiques et mécanismes en cours selon les échelles territoires devraient, dans le futur, profiter pleinement aussi de la dividende démographique. Et on se rend compte que les pays limitrophes de l'espace communautaire, comme la CEDEAO par exemple, entretiennent des relations et signent des accords bilatéraux. Prenons le cas par exemple du Tchad ou du Cameroun qui sont obligés aussi de traiter avec des pays comme le Nigeria. Prenons aussi le cas des pays comme peut-être la Mauritanie et le Sénégal. Donc, il y a des accords bilatéraux pour permettre certaines formes de mobilité en rapport avec les activités socio-économiques et l'utilisation des ressources naturelles. Je pense par exemple à la transhumance, je pense aux pêcheurs saisonniers. La question, c'est comment faire un inventaire de l'ensemble des dispositifs juridiques qui existent pour capitaliser certaines expériences et éventuellement les mettre à l'échelle. Alors, le second point de discussion ou de synthèse, c'est en rapport avec les questions liées au changement climatique encore. Dans le contexte de la libre circulation, le changement climatique représente un défi majeur pour toutes les échelles territoriales, avec des manifestations différentes selon les régions. Il y a des données qui existent au niveau État, il y a des données aussi du centre Agrimet et peut-être dans d'autres pays qui montrent vraiment que ces changements climatiques, on devra s'attendre à des fréquences plus accrues des phénomènes climatiques extrêmes, imprévisibles et difficilement maîtrisables, avec des risques de dommages assez élevés sur le capital naturel, notamment sur les pâturages, les zones de culture, les eaux de surface. Il apparaît de plus en plus clair que les changements climatiques jouent un rôle croissant dans les migrations ou les mobilités, tant au niveau des zones rurales qu'entre celles-ci et des zones urbaines. Dans les zones de départ, majoritairement en milieu rural, la migration est davantage le fait des jeunes qui impactent directement sur les disponibilités de main-d'œuvre dans les exploitations familiales. Et dans le secteur de la pêche, dont une grande partie se retrouve aujourd'hui une population composée essentiellement d'enfants, de femmes et de personnes âgées. Donc, nous avons fait un plaidoyer à la question du genre. Le changement climatique devrait affecter toutes les formes de migration, interne, transfrontalière, de courte, de longue distance, temporaire, permanente et volontaire, forcée, et avoir des impacts négatifs sur des millions de pauvres du continent. L'idéal maintenant en matière de recherche serait de faire des recherches sur des dispositifs juridiques et légaux pour accompagner, voire faciliter les mobilités selon les territoires considérés pour éviter certaines incertitudes. Et comment intégrer la mobilité dans les outils de planification et les agendas du continent et des pays. Le troisième point critique pour nous, c'était les questions liées à la résilience. Alors, l'impact du changement climatique et les différentes formes de dégradation de l'environnement peut avoir des impacts sur les moyens d'existence des populations. Les futures recherches sur la résilience des populations en zone rurale et urbaine peuvent s'appuyer sur les migrations de travail agricole afin de les mettre au cœur des politiques publiques, car elles appellent à un véritable besoin de protection qui semble devoir s'amplifier avec le changement climatique. Il nous faut établir une cartographie des bassins d'emploi des travailleurs migrants agricoles ainsi qu'une typologie des principaux modèles d'agriculture. Agriculture familiale, agriculture durable. Nous sommes dans un contexte où le taux d'urbanisation, même si c'est assez faible, les tendances démographiques montrent qu'on aura d'ici 25 ans un doublement de la population et qu'au niveau des grandes villes, l'extension se fait au niveau des zones agricoles périurbaines. Comment maintenant profiter davantage pour développer l'agriculture urbaine et périurbaine? Comment aussi utiliser les savoirs locaux? Comment intégrer dans ce contexte aussi, nous devons évaluer leur importance dans les dynamiques migratoires individuelles et collectives. Et dans quelle mesure la migration de travail peut être comprise comme une forme d'adaptation au changement climatique et de permettre aussi une résilience des populations. Alors, ces éléments que je viens de citer sont tirés des notes conceptuelles, des idées de projets et des inputs fournis par les collègues et d'autres groupes thématiques. Je termine par vous dire que nous avons travaillé autour de six projets, idées de projets. Le premier, c'est le rôle des accords bilatéraux entre les États et la gestion des déplacements des migrants dans le cadre des catastrophes du changement climatique en Afrique. Le second projet, c'est la mise en œuvre nationale des accords de libre circulation dans le cadre des catastrophes du changement climatique, les opportunités et les obstacles. La libre circulation des catastrophes et changements climatiques, quels sont les enseignements qui sont tirés ailleurs par Tamara. La question de l'immobilité dans le cadre des catastrophes et du changement climatique, examen des obstacles et de la mobilité régionale par Dr Caroline Gizigraf. Moi-même, j'ai travaillé sur acteurs, stratégies et dispositifs juridiques et réglementaires pour un développement durable de la transhumance dans le contexte du changement climatique et de croissance démographique et des conflits au niveau de l'espace sous-régional ouest-africain, vers une meilleure connaissance du lien entre migration de travail et changements environnementaux en Afrique de l'Ouest par Sohnasi et l'OIM. Donc, j'ai cité des noms, mais c'était un travail d'équipe. Nous avons été accompagnés et on s'est supportés mutuellement. Voilà ce que je voulais présenter, chers collègues. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much, Dr. Wad, for the excellent summary. And now we move to the next working group on refugee and human rights law. Esther, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, Esther, can hear you loud and clear.
Great.
You have about 5 minutes. If you can do it under 5 minutes, the better. Thank you, Esther. Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you. So thank you so much, and good morning to all participants. A pleasure to be with you today, and I have the pleasure of presenting as co-facilitator for this working group together with Professor Ademola. I also have the opportunity to present on behalf of Keith, who unfortunately could not be present now. So perhaps just there is some noise in the background. Yes. So perhaps just outlining the results of the group. Well, there were some very excellent proposals that actually came out of the discussion for the research agenda, which basically was about mapping existing laws and policies which relate to human rights and displacement frameworks, and also around providing sound information to understand best displacement in the context of climate change in Africa, and of particular relevancy as well to the Southern Africa region. Came out of the discussion and the rich discussions, 9 proposals, as well as 5 cross-cutting issues. The theme of the proposals were on climate change, obviously, and conceptualizing displacement in the context of disasters and climate change. They were about disaster risk reduction, free movement, more particularly free movement agreements in the context of disaster and climate change in the continent. Migration, more specifically on the nexus between labor migration and environmental change, but also on transhumance, which we know is also very much applicable in our continent. Refugee law as well. How do disasters and climate change impact public order within the meaning of Article 1.2 of the, particularly of 1.2 of the 69 OAU Convention. On another proposal, suggestion for research was about human rights law. And another one was on protecting IDPs, and also another one on planned relocation. The cross-cutting issues were, as I've mentioned, 5. And what came out after analyzing this proposal is that we could actually merge some of this proposal into a few. But maybe going into some of the thoughts that actually Keys kindly provided me to present to you. These are as follow. So the working group basically underscored the relevance and importance of refugee and human rights law for the protection of people displaced across borders in the context of disaster and climate change. It was acknowledged by participants that Africa has a rich legal framework in this area, including the 1969 OAU Convention governing the specific aspects of refugee problems in Africa, the African Charter on Human People's Rights, the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child, the Maputo Protocol for Women and Girls' Rights in Africa, and the African Union Convention for the Protection and Assistance of Internally Displaced Persons in Africa, otherwise called as the Kampala Convention. Various African countries also have strong and progressive constitutional frameworks that include the principle of non-refoulement and the right to a healthy environment. The working group also showed that refugee and human rights law are not the ultimate solution, but one tool in a larger toolbox of law and policy areas relevant to prevent and, of course, to respond to cross-border displacement. The multi-causality of displacement in the context of disasters and climate change was acknowledged, countering the misperception that disasters have natural causes that cannot produce refugees. Disasters are not a natural phenomenon, but a combined result of exposure to a natural hazards within people's and societies' adaptive capacity based on their pre-existing vulnerabilities to deal with the event. People may then be compelled to flee when they are too vulnerable to withstand the impact of disasters, when their vulnerability relates to bad government, marginalization, or discrimination. They may be refugees under relevant international and regional refugee law instruments. Understanding the interacting drivers of cross-border displacement and how they relate to the legal refugee definitions was recognized as an important knowledge gap during the discussions. Further analysis is needed to understand the realities in Africa and how climate change, environmental degradation, and disasters affect or impact on a country's public order. This is, in turn, will inform the applicability of the regional refugee definition under the 69 OAU Convention, requiring people to be compelled to leave their home and seek refuge abroad owing to events seriously disturbing public order. The purpose of the research project is to analyze 4 specific case studies involving situations of disasters and or the impacts of climate change in Africa. These case studies cover a range of issues and cross-cutting themes, including the effects of both short-term and slow-onset disasters impact of climate change, impacts on specific groups such as pastoralists, and the existence of nexus dynamics between disasters and climate change, and more traditional causes of displacement, such as conflict. In addition, because of Africa's rich human rights law framework, the working group also identified an important opportunity, an opportunity to more effectively use this framework to protect people displaced across border in a context of disasters and climate change. To allow for this, the working group felt the need to map the opportunities this framework has to offer, including the commonly used principle of non-refoulement, but also the perhaps novel right of a healthy environment, and analyze the possibility of progressive interpretation and application as well as extraterritorial application. Finally, it should be mentioned that the working group acknowledged the importance of practicing lawyers, asylum adjudicators, and judges to advance the interpretation and application of refugee and human rights in this area. A gap exists in knowing how to overcome barriers that exist with lawyers in taking asylum claims forward and litigating them in court, and with decision makers and judges to understand how approach an asylum seeker made that is related to disaster and or climate change. I will stop here and thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Esther, for that. Sanjula, jump in.
Thank you, Edwin. Hello, everybody. My name is Sanjula Weerasinghe, and I'm an affiliate of the Andrew and Renata Kaldor Centre for International Refugee Law. I have the pleasure and honour to co-lead the working group on protecting internally displaced persons and planned relocation, together with Martina Caterina, who is the chair of the Global Protection Cluster Task Team on Law and Policy, and Romola Adiola from the University of Pretoria. First, on behalf of all of the organisers, let me thank all the experts and participants who attended the sessions and shared their knowledge, experience and suggestions. We developed 4 research proposals based on our discussions, which I will mention in due course. First, on the topic of protecting IDPs, let me just highlight a few of the salient themes that emerged. First, there are some national laws and policies specifically on internal displacement in the continent that have been developed at the national level. They draw on the guiding principles and the Kampala Convention and generally take an inclusive approach. This means the instruments define IDPs to include people who are forced to flee their own countries in the context of multiple triggers, including disasters. Second, Despite inclusive instruments, internal displacement associated with disasters and climate change could be considered the poorer cousin to displacement associated with conflict. The latter can sometimes dominate policy and programmatic discussions. Third, even though the scale of internal displacement associated with disasters is significant, there are challenges to ensuring it is recognized and remains visible. As a consequence, it's important to demonstrate which aspects of prevention, protection, and solutions are distinct to internal displacement associated with disasters and identify ways to address those dimensions. In light of these points, we need to understand how IDP-specific instruments are implemented in practice to address displacement associated with disasters, including slow onset disasters such as droughts. So one of the key research proposals to come out of this group was to work on that theme and identify how laws and policies are implemented in practice to better protect people who flee in the context of disasters. On planned relocation, let me also highlight a few salient points. First, we described planned relocation as the planned permanent movement of a group of people from an area of origin to an area of destination, which has been initiated in association with a natural hazard. Some people may use other terms such as resettlement or relocation to describe similar forms of mobility. Second, we learned there are at least 39 cases of planned relocation spread across 20 countries in Africa. Most of the cases were associated with weather-related or coastal hazards. They took on different spatial patterns. They occurred in both rural and urban areas, and most cases had started after the year 2000, and some are still ongoing. Third, on law and policy, we heard that knowledge on policy frameworks that underpin planned relocation is limited. As such, another proposal seeks to map and analyze national instruments that discuss planned relocation. Fourth, the absence of specific norms on planned relocation doesn't mean there is an absence of applicable domestic norms. So in an ongoing relocation in Senegal, for example, many different domestic instruments were applicable, including the Constitution and land laws, as well as non-domestic instruments, such as the World Bank's involuntary resettlement policy. To understand these different legal, policy, institutional, and coordination approaches to planned relocation, our third research proposal seeks to develop detailed case studies. It provides an opportunity to understand the characteristics of planned relocation in the continent and to identify lessons. Finally, we heard how research and considerations of movement in the context of disasters and climate change can be compartmentalized, that sometimes there's a failure to take into account possible interlinkages, including between different forms of mobility, or to engage different sectors and disciplines. For instance, efforts to better integrate displacement and relocation into disaster risk reduction, disaster risk management, and climate change adaptation is only recently beginning to emerge. Movements, including internal displacement and planned relocation, are multi-causal, and this understanding needs to inform the development of governance frameworks, institutional mandates, coordination approaches, and financing. In this context, there's a need to consider how to design complementary legal and policy instruments while also fostering conceptual clarity. So, paying heed to these comments and based on insights from Mozambique, where internally displaced persons affected by Cyclone Idai were subsequently relocated as a form of durable solution, our last research proposal aims to examine interlinkages between internal displacement and planned relocation, and to analyze how internal displacement instruments may be applicable to relocations. There were many other points that emerged in the discussions, Edwin, but I'll stop there and hand over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for keeping straight to the point, Sanjula. And I see Martina is also come on board. Martina, how are you? I would now thank you so much for all the colleagues, for the excellent, the colleagues and all the ones who didn't talk for the excellent summary of your works. I'll now turn over to Tamara. Tamara, you can now pick up and tell us about the next research agenda Where are we heading to? Tamara, please come on board. You have another, I'm looking, it's exactly 15 minutes and 33 seconds. Tamara, go ahead.
Thanks so much, Edwin. And I've been told that the time police are watching me, so I'm very mindful. Thank you so much to everyone who has spoken already. When we first conceived of this project, this workshop series, really it was myself and Edwin and a couple of more colleagues talking together about maybe we could do some research together. That was almost 18 months ago now, and with a few shifts and changes along the way, it has turned into what we're presenting today, which is the work of so many people over such a long period. And yet in some ways, also just the beginning of future collaboration and research. In my brief remarks, I'd like to give you a taste, I suppose, of what the research agenda, which is the key output of this workshop series, will contain. So this has been the main objective of the workshop series overall, to set the agenda, to identify the next steps that are required in research, to support law and policy responses to addressing disaster and climate change related displacement and migration. You've heard something of many of those research proposals and priorities already. What I'd like to do now is to give you a taste or a snapshot, I suppose, of how it will be presented in the research agenda. Eric, if I could have the next slide, please. I'd like to take you through three components in particular of the research agenda, which will be published later in the year. And I'll apologise up front for the amount of text on these slides. I know it's very annoying having slides that you can't read through fully, but I wanted to make sure that if you were really looking out for human rights law, if you're really interested in transhumance, in disaster risk reduction, that you get to see the area that interests you most. So the first component of the research agenda is the one presented on the slide, and it's recommendations for future research by the specific fields of law and policy that were subject to discussion in the workshop series. We've heard already that these are not the only fields of law and policy that are relevant. And certainly, as we've heard, these are not the only research questions that need to be answered. But we do think that each of these proposals would make a really valuable next step in understanding what's required either to implement existing laws and policies or to develop new ones where they are needed. So for example, if we look at free movement, we know that regional free movement agreements can and do facilitate cross-border movement in the context of disasters and climate change. What we don't know is exactly how or to what extent the national implementation of those agreements, including national frameworks, but also bilateral arrangements between states, how they might either support that kind of movement or potentially impede it, impose barriers. If we look at refugee law, we know that potentially some people displaced in the context of disasters and climate change will qualify for refugee protection, particularly under the expanded criteria of the 1969 African Convention. But we don't yet have a clear picture of the impact that disasters and climate change have on public order, and when or how they will amount to events seriously disturbing public order, which Chaloka mentioned in his comments. So each of the questions on this slide sets out what we think is a valuable next step for each of these fields of law and policy. Next slide, please, Eric. The second component that I'd like to share with you is the research recommendations that the research agenda will make for research that cuts across multiple fields of law and policy. We hear a lot about the risks of taking a siloed approach to this issue, of having different laws and different policies doing different things and not necessarily speaking to each other. So these research proposals aim to bring together different areas of law and policy and better understand or better support the integration of those different fields. The first one here builds on the IGAD study that was mentioned earlier to understand or to map how human mobility features in disaster risk reduction, climate change, and development laws and policies. The second question here asks how disaster displacement is managed or dealt with in national and local institutional structures, which in a way is the very heart of implementation. How are the different laws and policies that exist brought together in practice? What examples are there of very effective practices at the national level that could serve as a model or evidence for development elsewhere? So these are the cross-cutting research proposals that will be included in the research agenda. Finally, the third thing I want to share with you is that across all of the thematic working group discussions, there were a number of themes and issues that kept coming up over and over again. The need for further and better data and evidence, the need to advance human rights, the need to pay specific attention to marginalised groups, including women, children, people with disabilities, Indigenous peoples, and others, the need for better integration across different fields of law and policy, and so on. A couple more particularly important ones was the need to take into account slow onset disasters and environmental degradation, not only sudden onset impacts. And as we've heard already, the nexus between disasters and climate change on the one hand, and law and policy, and conflict and violence on the other hand. So these are what we've called for now general principles for future research on this topic. These are not necessarily research proposals in themselves, though some of them may be, and in fact some of them are. But these are principles that really need to be taken into account across all future research. It's not necessarily the case that they will all be relevant all of the time, but that people who are contemplating engaging in further research or supporting further research to address this issue must be alert to these cross-cutting issues and, where relevant, incorporate them into their research. Now, when the research agenda is published later this year, we very much hope that it will become a document that is used, that it is used by many of you in your work. If you're interested to do research, if you're interested to support research, we hope that the research agenda will provide a go-to place where you can benefit from the collective thinking of the many, many experts, researchers, policymakers, government representatives, and so on that we've had engaged in this discussion. One place we particularly hope that it is used is within a new research network that will be established following the completion of this workshop series. Now, this is the second objective of the workshop series. And again, one of the things that brought Edwin and myself and others together in the first place was the idea of having more people working on this issue and more people working together on the issue. We're still in the process of refining how the research network will look, and importantly, we're still in the process of securing the resources that we need to establish this network. And certainly if there are those of you on the call who are interested in contributing to the network, whether by supporting it financially or in a more substantive way, we would really love to hear from you. But let me present the vision. This is what we hope the network will look like. Firstly, the research network should be interdisciplinary. Researchers, policy experts, practitioners working in a range of fields will be very welcome to this network. As I think it's been very clear in our discussions today, and certainly over the last 2 months, it is this interdisciplinary perspectives and cooperation that gives us the best results and the best opportunity of finding good solutions. Second, we want the network to be bilingual. We know from our discussions the advantage of being able to discuss, collaborate and compare across different countries and regions of Africa. This workshop series has been bilingual in English and French, and that has been really helpful in being more inclusive in our discussions. We really hope that we can continue the core network activities in this way. The network will be led by a steering group of researchers and experts who are based in Africa. And here, this brings me to my next point, which I think is really important, that this is a network on displacement and migration in the context of disasters and climate change in Africa. There is a real need for more research and more support for research that is conducted in situ by those who are working in institutions, in universities in Africa. And of course, there are many of us, including myself and the Kaldor Centre and many others who've been involved and made a great contribution to the workshop series, who stand ready to support the network and participate in whatever way is helpful. But it's really critical that the network is fundamentally a space for African researchers, policy experts, and practitioners. And for this reason, we envisage there being two categories, I suppose, of participation in the research network. That core group of network members who are working in and on Africa, but also that broader group of friends to the network who are really interested to engage and learn and discuss more. Finally, the exact activities of the network are to be decided by the steering group and by the members once it's established. And we look forward in the coming months to being in contact with all of you to invite you to formally join the network and to set a date for the launch of the network. But some of the things we imagine could be useful, and based on what you've all told us, those of you who've completed the survey about this, we imagine a combination of webinars, networking events, both virtual and in person, and dialogues between researchers and policymakers. The message from those of you we've consulted with and heard from via the survey has been quite clear when it comes to the research network. There's a need for people and a desire for people to learn more and also to collaborate. And we hope that with your support, we'll soon be inviting you to join and inviting you to join the launch of a genuinely multidisciplinary network. I'll stop there and hand back to you, Edwin. Thanks very much.
Thank you, and thank you for heeding to the call of the time police. Thank you so much. The next, now we are moving now to sort of the concluding remarks, and Tamara and all the rest who have spoken have sort of taken us to where we came from and the steps that now where we are looking forward to. So in the final session on the concluding remarks, we're going to have, again, just like what we did when we started, we invited the institutions that were on board the project to say a few introductory remarks. Now they have heard what we have done, so I would like also to give them an opportunity now to sort of close the session by telling us whether we are on the right track or whether there are a couple of things that we need to tighten. Now, on that score, I would also like to thank some of the funders, the ones who generously supported us, not only in terms of the financial support, but also in terms of expertise. You have seen representatives of IOM, you have seen UNHCR, you've also seen GIZ, the PDD, you've seen the AAUN, the Africa Australia's University Network, the Kaldor Centre, the University of Nairobi, where I'm based, and the Centre for Human Rights. And I'd like to thank all of them for giving us the opportunity actually to have this workshop series. So I'm going to ask representatives of these institutions to give us their closing remarks, and essentially they'll have just about maybe say 4 minutes to sort of wrap it all up. And I'll start with Jane. Jane, are you there? Jane,
yes,
good, Jane. Yeah, so Jane, start us off. Thank you, Jane.
Thank you very much. Well, it's been an enormous pleasure and privilege for the Kaldor Centre for International Refugee Law to be part of this workshop series. And I have to say I'm thoroughly impressed with the research proposals that the series has generated. The energy, drive and commitment of the co-leads and participants has been absolutely outstanding. And for me, it inspires confidence that despite the immense challenges presented by disasters and climate change when it comes to mobility, we're certainly in good hands if we want to see creative thinking and dedication to finding humane and durable solutions. The recommendations for future research that we've heard about today will surely generate new knowledge, new awareness, new ideas, and new legal and policy approaches. They range from consideration of conceptual frameworks to building and refining the evidence base, to improving the protection of people on the move or people who are stuck, as the case may be, to better incorporation of local knowledge, right through to better implementation of laws and policies on the ground. The Kaldor Centre is delighted to both endorse and support the implementation of the research agenda for advancing law and policy responses to displacement and migration in the context of disasters and climate change in Africa. In particular, we pledge to share our resources and our expertise, to support the establishment of the new research network in whatever way that the steering group considers most helpful, and to explore how we can support further capacity building and professional development for researchers in the region, such as by developing training materials, supporting early career researchers, and other related activities. So congratulations to everybody, and thank you very much to all of you who've been involved in this workshop series, particularly to those who participated in all 22 hours of online discussion, as well as the many additional hours behind the scenes. I very much look forward to seeing the next stages of this project. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jane. I will now move to Professor Albert Muma, University of Nairobi, who's representing the Dean, Professor Winifred Kamau.
Thank you very much, Edwin. As indicated, my name is Albert Muma, and I'm standing in for the Dean, School of Law. I'm one of the two associate deans. Essentially, I would like to echo comments which have been made by, my counterpart, Professor McAdam, that this has been an excellent opportunity to look more deeply into an issue that is very cross-cutting in nature. Climate change, by definition is a cross-cutting issue. And, School of Law, University of Nairobi is privileged and very happy to have a chance to participate in, a process that will lead to looking much more deeply into some of the issues that emerge when you look at issues of migration, impacts of climate change, and going forward, what kinds of research can be undertaken arising out of this process. The idea of setting up a research network is one that School of Law, University of Nairobi welcomes, and we'll be happy to be part of this. Interdisciplinary research focusing on law and policy is something that University of Nairobi has been interested in and has focused on over a number of years. We did establish at School of Law, University of Nairobi, a center for policy and center. It is, it gives us a platform from which to collaborate on these kinds of issues that deal with, interdisciplinary research. So we are very happy that this process, is underway. I think it has become customer and things through virtual means. And virtual means gives us probably the potential to undertake some of these collaborative research programs without having to travel, which has always been sometimes a hindrance to those who are placed in a position where finances can be limited, such process that has begun, and to say that we are very happy to continue to participate in this, and we will try as much as possible to play an active role and to benefit as much as we are able to contribute. So thank you very much, Edwin, and thank you to all of those participating.
Thank you so much. I think that more than one person may be having some connection issues, so I might jump in to introduce our next speaker. I don't think that we have Professor Viljoen from here, from the Centre for Human Rights at the University of Pretoria. If he joins us later, we'll come back to him. So I'll turn now to Atle Solberg, Head of the Secretariat for the Platform on Disaster Displacement. Atle, over to you.
Thank you, Tamara, and can you hear me okay?
Very well.
So I was about to congratulate Edwin and all the colleagues for his work, and hopefully he can hear me, but I also want to say a particular thank you to you, Tamara, and also all the experts and practitioners and policymakers that have joined this series. I think adding a little to the last speaker, I think one interesting aspect of all this series is that we had to do it virtually, or you had to do it virtually, and really that if you look at it, there are challenges and benefits of doing our events virtually. But I think the positive elements really come across as strong in this virtual workshop series, and also the range of people that you have been able to engage, and the range of experience. I noted 264 people, all the fields, all the issues that have been covered. I don't think that would have been the case, Tamara, when we talked about this workshop in March last year for the onset of the COVID. So I think that's also an indication of the potential of the research network to work virtually on these issues. We, as the Platform on Disaster Displacement, we have a lot of our work is situated in this intersection of research, evidence, and analysis, and then the need for policy and normative understanding and policy and normative development. So clearly the outcome of what you have produced is directly relevant for us, and it will be very useful for the platform as we are moving towards the end of our strategic period in 2022 and fleshing out the future work to build on what you have presented to us. We also stand ready and we pledge our commitment to support the research agenda. I think we need some further discussion in terms of what would be most helpful from our side. Are there specific pieces of research that we can support? Are there more broader support in launching the research agenda and the network that will be needed? So we stand ready to find a way of supporting this. We are a policy process, so we are the user. We can think of the platform more as a user of the research agenda and the network. So you will see us almost as consumer and user of what we produce. But we're also willing, of course, to chip in and support as you go forward. I think your challenge as you go ahead is to establish a robust network. I think a network needs support, it needs commitment, and it needs resources to be able to operate. And I really hope that the number of people that have been engaged in these areas and are here today can come together and pledge support to keep the network running, also with resources. And we stand ready to contribute our part on this. So with these words, thank you so much. I think dangerous to try to thank particular individuals. I just want to thank all the organizing partners. It's been a real pleasure to work with you throughout this series, and we also stand ready to move into the next step as the agenda is launched and also the network is launched. And then I see Edwin is back, so thank you so much, Edwin, for your attention.
Okay, when you see my face, that's an indication that now you need to stop. Yeah? Okay, thank you so much, Atle. Mariam Traore, IOM. Mariam?
I'm here. Hello, everyone. Hi,
Mariam.
My name is Mariam Traore Chazal-Noël. I'm a senior policy officer at the International Organization for Migration. So, I mean, this has been a really, really interesting workshop. It's really heartening to see how much has been developed. For us at IOM, research and knowledge sharing really is a priority, especially on environmental migration. We have been investing a lot in the past in this. We have several tools that have allowed us to understand better the nature of the link between migration, environment, and climate change. I'm sure this has been discussed before, so I'm not going to go into that now. But all that to say that this research agenda, for us, it will be key to advance our work in terms of research and knowledge sharing. So we are very, very, very happy with the outcomes. Of course, there are gaps, but we are also hopeful that with all the tools we have at our disposals, that we can fill these gaps at some point. So that's why we have invested in organizing this webinar series. We are so thankful to the partners, to the participants, to the co-organizers. It's been a journey, but I think the outcome is just amazing. So in particular, I mean, Atle, you said it's hard to thank everyone, but I just want to single out a couple of people. So thank you to Christina Daskiewicz, because she's been working a lot on this. Thank you to Tamara Wood. I mean, obviously, you're one of the engine behind this. So looking forward, we will, just like you, Atle, we are committed to support this research network, and we actually have set aside some funding, but we are looking forward to fund some of the research proposals. So all of this will be part of a bigger discussion. We'll also try to really connect with the work that we are doing on other parts of the continent, including our work with the African Union. So all of this work that has been done for this workshop series, it is part of a project that is called Implementing Global Policies on Environmental Migration and Disaster Displacement in West Africa. We're implementing this project with PDD and UNHCR, so thank you to both of them for this support. It's a project funded by the government of France. Without their support, we would not have been able to organize this series of workshop. And last but not least, I think we all have to thank Cindiana Pushkas. She is the manager of this project. She's been putting a lot of efforts and energy into making this a success. So thank you, Cindiana. And with that, I'll finish, and I'm so looking forward to see what comes up next. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mariam, for the short analysis and also the precision in terms of what we can do moving forward. Next is Angel, UNHCR.
Thank you very much. Good day to all. Angel Dikonge Atangana is my name. I'm the Deputy Director for UNHCR in Southern Africa. Well, let me start by saying really, I'm truly galvanized and really thrilled by the workshop, the series of workshops altogether. Having participated in a few sessions, including as a moderator, really has told me that we were into something great. And I sincerely wish to convey our congratulations to all organizers, in particular Tamara Wood, who has really been championing this behind the engine and in front of the engines, I should say. And all the partners, including the IOM, IGAD, GIZ, all of you, please feel really recognized. For us, we should want to really recall that amongst the various forms of human mobility that occur in the context of climate change, displacement or forced displacement related to disaster and climate change is one of the biggest challenges that we really can seek to work on, and indeed provide some frameworks for protecting or assisting those who are involved. In UNHCR, we really support the series, the approach taken by the series of workshops, which for us actually goes back to the comprehensiveness, the holistic approach that we have ourselves proclaimed for dealing with refugees. And we believe it is not even a call in terms of climate change or disaster management, but it is a must. It is the way to go. It is, we have no option but to being comprehensive in terms of our own involvement. And we do acknowledge very much the rich discussions that have taken place here in these series of workshops. And we also very much are in agreement with the themes that have been identified for research. And we want to single out a few of them, including the advancing the interpretation of the application of the refugee law instruments, notably the OAU Convention, Article 1.2, which we know definitely has a lot of room for bringing about a framework to protect and assist the forcibly displaced in the context of climate change or natural disaster. We indeed also agree for the promotion of the development and implementation of comprehensive national frameworks to prevent and address internal displacement, including modeling on the Kampala Convention, which we know, as we were reminded by Professor Chaloka and others who spoke before me, that really there are provisions therein that could serve us very well in this field. We want to also specify the mapping and the better understanding of the legal frameworks and policy to apply to relocations and through case study to providing material to advocate for a change or improvement of current practices or policies. And finally, we want to single out the clarifying of concept to ensure that displacement and related protection issues are well and coherently addressed in policy and plans. We do definitely herewith want to confirm UNHCR's full support substantively and including financially for these plans for the researches. We really emphatically want to affirm our commitment to participate in all manners possible to developing these research tracks. We believe that it is a must. We have to do this, and there is no possibility for us to set back. So we really welcome this research plans, and we are into them with all the stakeholders. We do also want to confirm the readiness of my agency for especially the regional bureau, the regional bureaus, I should say, in Africa, our special advisor on climate change matters, and of course DIPs globally, that we really are all together to put our hands on the deck to ensure that these researches are conducted well and will be serving our purpose well on the continent. Of course, linking up with all the stakeholders, including the RECs and who not. Finally, I really would like to say, I want to leave you with something that has been in my mind ever since, I should say, the 2011 event, the 9/11 event 20 years ago, to say that really, I believe there will be probably no holistic upholding of the human rights of the people of this world unless there is sustainable development for all. And there would probably, and it is valid vice versa, And probably there would be none of them if there is no lasting peace. This is what I would call the triangulation of the three pillars of our charter, of the UN Charter, which to me has never been more relevant than today. And it is great that we, the world, is realizing that this interconnectivity or interconnection and globality of the issues that are facing the world are really at that level. And the call, to me, the time is now, and the call is for all of us, as we all have a role to play, and really everyone has something to do. So thank you so much, and I'm galvanized that we are finding all ourselves together here, and we are all thrilled to continue on this great proceeding. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Angel, for those kind words of conclusion. The next person I'll call is Charles Obila for IGAD. Charles.
Thank you very much, Edwin. I'm standing in for my colleague Lena with a last-minute emergency and she could not join. First of all, I want to thank all the participants. The discussions have really been very informative. We've been able to learn from the experiences in the other regions and also share the practices across the different regions of Africa. But we've also, it's been brought to the fore that there still exist major gaps, and I hope that we can take this forward. For IGAD, the recommendations as outlined by Tamara remain very key for us, particularly all of them. But I would want to highlight a few that we think are of immediate need. Of course, one, the link between disaster risk reduction and displacement, that is very critical for us, particularly the development of displacement-related indicators. Secondly, on the issue of free movement of persons and free movement regimes and how they could also be expanded to allow the freer mobility or the regular mobility of people affected by disasters, particularly in the context of the IGAD protocol on free movement. That is also very critical for us. The other area is on the expanded definition of the OAU convention, and we know that IGAD region is perhaps the only region where this has been piloted, but we never built on it. So I think it is time to also go back and relook into that and see how we can actually standardize its operation. The other area is on issues to deal with internal displacement, which perhaps remain the greatest numbers, especially in the African continent. So we cannot do without addressing the knowledge gaps when it comes to internal displacement, including issues of planned relocation. And going forward, for us, what is very key for us is the fact that also as we move towards launching the network, within the IGAD region, we also have just established a regional network of universities, and we hope that this network can actually piggyback on the network of universities that have has just been established, and we can work around that. And lastly, again, I want to thank everyone. I want to thank the conveners, particularly Tamara, Edwin, colleagues from IOM, UNHCR, for really organizing this workshop series, and we hope we can engage more going forward in moving the agenda forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Charles, and thank you for filling Lena's shoes. We know she was destined to come, but you pitched in very fast. And also, thanks for letting us know about the other network that is already running. Perhaps if you can just also on the chat, just share if they have a Mesora website that is running so that folks who are interested in jumping can jump on. So last but not least is Dr. Thomas Leonard from the GIZ. Thomas? Yes.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me well? I hope so.
Yep,
right.
Go ahead.
Since I'm kind of new to this round, let me briefly introduce myself. My name is Thomas Lennartz, and I'm representing mainly two GIZ projects that will greatly benefit from the outcomes of this workshop series. I work as an advisor for the Global Program on Human Mobility in the context of climate change, which implements activities in both the IGAD and soon also in the ECOWAS region. And also our IGAD component is very closely linked to another GIZ project entitled Strengthening IGAD's Migration Policy Implementation, which obviously works in the IGAD region and will also greatly benefit from the outcomes of this workshop series. I would like to begin echoing my previous speakers, adding my words of thanks to the organizers of this virtual workshop series on behalf of GIZ, but also on behalf of our commissioning party, the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development. From our point of view, and looking at these 20+ research proposals that have been developed in those different working groups over the last two to 3 months, I think that this workshop series was an extraordinarily productive endeavor, and it was a great success. You were able to bring together more than 170 researchers and practitioners is what I read. Just now I heard it was even more than 200. You were able to bring all these people in across Africa into one virtual room to plan the next steps in addressing research gaps and pressing questions related to human mobility in the context of climate change and disasters. And that's why I would also like to extend my sincere gratitude to all those researchers and practitioners who took the time to participate in the different working groups and who worked on this impressive list of research proposals. Bringing in your experiences, your ideas, your enthusiasm for our common topic is really essential for closing existing knowledge gaps and developing solutions for human mobility across the African continent. Thank you all very much for this and for your dedication. It's really appreciated. In your research proposals, you touched upon questions that are really very important and that need to be answered thoroughly in order to addressing existing and future challenges. Questions such as how can we facilitate free movement on a bilateral, regional, or even continental level? How can mobility be better integrated into urban development strategies? How do climate change, human mobility, and conflict dynamics intersect? And how do we support people that are actually unable to move? We here at GIZ are very interested in supporting the implementation of this new research agenda, and we will definitely take all the research questions and ideas presented in the proposals into our next planning cycle, where we can discuss this with our partners in the IGAD and ECOWAS region in order to define how answering these questions can actually help us to achieve our common goals. We're also happy to support any research conducted in cooperation with any other of the partners present here or that might partner up with us in future. By providing any data, information, or context that we might have, and working for a global program that supports activities in both the ECOWAS and IGAD region, as well as in 3 other regions of the world. I hope that we can provide some valuable support, especially to those topics that focus on comparative elements and that might benefit from exchange across Africa and beyond. So looking at this virtual room full of expertise and enthusiasm about getting human mobility into the context of climate change right, I will leave this meeting with a very optimistic feeling that together we will achieve substantial progress in the years to come. Thank you very much for your effort and for inviting me today.
Thank you, Thomas, and also thank you for taking us through to the next stages, and look forward to picking things up as we go on. So we have about 6 minutes to go, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm going to give just 1 minute to anyone who perhaps something pricked your mind as you are going through the session, to say anything that they would like to say about the workshop series moving forward. And I've seen Tarba, you have already raised your hand, so just in 1 minute, you can pitch. I know Judge Mativo is here. I also know some of the previous presenters have come on board. If it's just something you'd like to say. So Taba, just 1 minute.
Thank you very much, Professor Edwin. It's a pleasure. I just want to express my profound gratitude to the organizers of this workshop. Really, it is one of a kind. I must be sincere. I've never had it this way, quite a long time. The networking is much appreciated, and I'm looking forward for further collaborations. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Tara. Is there someone else who wants to jump in? Can I just come on board? Just come on board. Just turn on your.
D'accord, merci. Je peux prendre la parole? D'accord, ok. Oui, merci. Je voudrais remercier toute l'assistance, les techniciens, les chercheurs, les financiers, tous ceux qui ont contribué d'une manière ou d'une autre à l'organisation de ces ateliers virtuels qui sont quand même novateurs dans la démarche. Ça permet de relier les expertises, les expériences des uns et des autres. Nous qui sommes dans le domaine de l'exécutif, du gouvernemental, serons heureux, en tout cas, de voir des résultats qui seront à la disposition des gouvernements pour aider à la mise en œuvre des politiques et des stratégies qui résulteront de toutes ces recherches. Spécial remerciement à Tamara et à tous ses collaborateurs et collaboratrices, au PDD, aux universitaires, à tous les chercheurs. Merci beaucoup. Que les prochaines rencontres soient plus directes. Merci.
Merci beaucoup. Anyone else? We still have a couple of seconds to go. All right. I can see this who has raised their hand. So it has been for us. It has been sessions that we conceptualized, as Tamara said, together with Romola, and we are happy that we actually got to this stage. I don't know whether France is here with us. France. Okay, France is not here with us, but thank you so much, everybody, for coming on board. There are a couple of people that I really want to thank. We have worked together with them. Tamara, definitely the long calls that we had with you with the time differences. Sarah also. Eric and Sophie, you provided very, very good background and logistical support. I also want to thank Lena. Lena did a very helped us a lot, and today Lena has shown us that Charles can also step in at a very short notice. Thank you so much. To the interpreters, you did an excellent job. Merci beaucoup for the excellent work that you did. Steering group, kudos to you, Christina. You brought us together. You made sure that everything was translated and was actually the information was dispersed in very good time. And also to you participants, you came in, you participated, you read through the documents that we circulated, and you gave us very valuable contributions. I mean, to have 250 plus people coming, it's not easy, but we managed to pull we managed to pull it together. I really hope that you'll join us in the next steps. We've already had the institutions have already given us their support. So it's really for us now to come on board and try and realize the ideals that we had at the beginning. So what I would like to request you all before we close, normally in a conference, we would take an actual photo. But what we're going to do, I want to ask everybody to turn on now their videos so we can see you, your beautiful backgrounds. Thank you. Chaloka is still enjoying himself on the beach. So once we all turn on our videos, I would like to ask Tamara, please, if you don't mind, can you take a photo of these were all our participants? Yeah, I think maybe we are more. Tamara, you can do that for us.
I certainly can, but keep smiling, everyone. I have a couple of screens to get through.
Okay, so just tell us when
you
want us to stop smiling.
Okay, last one. Done.
Okay, thank you guys. We started off, I promised that I will end this right on time. That's what we call the African time. We edit it right on time. So thank you so much, everybody. You can turn on your speakers now and just say bye to everyone. Thank you so much, Adle. And everybody, Sanjula, have a good one. I'm sure we'll be meeting. Angel, enjoy your time in Joburg or Pretoria.
Au revoir, merci beaucoup.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Everybody.
Bye.
A pleasure.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Merci.
Merci. And you can log out once you say Mexi and au revoir. Asante sana.
Kwaheri.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Okay. Only Sarah and Tamara should not log out. Thank you.